We are continuing our scoring of the January 2026 Life Science Biology Regents Exam. We are on cluster number 5, questions 19 through 22. And so this cluster is a hard pest to manage. It focuses on pesticide resistance in insects. And so, as always, you should have read the introduction, all that material, highlight anything that you felt was important, look at the two pictures of the larval stage and the adult stage, and then look at the graph. And the graph is where you're going to use most of the information to answer the questions in this cluster. So when you're looking at the graph, make sure, as always, you really read the title carefully. Look at each axis. Try to ask yourself, what is this data showing? So in this case, the title, the effect of butane fipronil on the resistance ratio of diamondback moths over time. So up at the top, you'll read a little bit about these moths and different stages. You could also read about butane fipronil. It's a control, it's an insecticide or a pesticide, we would call it. So the effect of that pesticide on these moths over time. We look at the x-axis. This is 10 generations of these moths. And then on the y-axis, we have resistance ratio. We know from what we've learned that in some insects or other organisms can have variations which make them resistant to different pesticides. And so we look at this graph before we even look at the question. What we're going to look at as well, at first, in the first few generations, there's very little resistance to this pesticide, butane fipronil. But then as the generations go on, the percent of resistant individuals increases drastically. By 10 generations, it's up over 80%. Okay, so that's the overall picture of the beginning of this cluster. And we get to the questions using evidence from the graph, which statement explains the resistance ratio. Okay, so this, we just talked about that. And if you look at the choices, again, you want to use process of elimination. These all start sort of with the same basic phrase. The proportion of the population that was resistant to butane fipronil. Now we have decreased, increased, did not change. So that's the first part of this question is, well, what actually happened? And the resistance increased. So immediately we could eliminate choice number 1 because that's saying that the population that was resistant decreased. Okay. We could also eliminate choice 4, okay, because it did not. This one says the resistance did not change, but actually it did. So now we're choosing between 2 and 3. The proportion of population resistant increased over time. They both say the same thing to start, but then the because is different. Because moths without resistance are more likely to survive and reproduce, or because moths with resistance are most likely to survive and reproduce. And the choice is 3. The correct answer for this question is 3. The resistance increased because they were more likely to, the moths that were resistant were more likely to survive. So choice 3, give yourself +1 if you got it correct. Question 20, which question would scientists ask to clarify the role of DNA in passing butane fipronil resistance from one generation to the next? So this part is crucial. The question should focus on DNA being passed from one generation to the next. When we look at our choices, does pesticide resistance in larvae result from body cell mutations? That doesn't tell us anything about passing from one generation to another. A mutation in a body cell would not be passed on. 2, do larval forms of the pesticide resistance have DNA that's identical to the adult form? Okay, again, these are the same organism. It's just different stages in their life. So their DNA is going to be identical, but that's not important to passing from one generation to another. 3, do parents have a gene that provides pesticide resistance within their gametes? That's the crucial phrase, because we know organisms only pass on the DNA in their gametes to the next generation. So this choice 3, looks like it's going to be good. Do all the offspring inherit identical DNA from both parents? That's not the way that sexual reproduction works. They don't inherit all DNA from both parents. Individuals inherit half of their DNA from each parent. So that's incorrect. Choice is 3. If you got it correct, give yourself the point in the margin. Now we have some more data and more description of an experiment. Excuse me. So an alternative to chemical pesticides is BT. Okay, it's a bacteria, and Bt produces proteins that are toxic to specific insects. Scientists study the effects on these moths. And so we look at our data. Again, what we're looking at is the mortality percentage. So how many of these moths died due to exposure of 4 different versions of Bt toxins. And that they're shown here in this middle column of the data. And we have 2 groups of moths that were exposed, and then we have the mortality in those groups and how the mortality varied at these different types of Bt toxins. And we see significant differences here between group 1 and group 2. Okay, let's read the question. Which statement explains the variation in mortality? So why is there this difference is what the question's really asking. We look at our choices. Group 1 is most likely to have the trait for resistance to Bt toxins because mortality is higher. So that wouldn't make sense there, 21, number 1, that the larva would having the trait for resistance would have higher mortality. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Group 2 larvae most likely have the trait for resistance because the mortality is lower. Okay, that is true, and that would be the explanation. So that looks good. But let's look at the other choices. Group 1 most likely have the resistance trait for resistance to pesticides because their mortality is lower. That's not correct. Their mortality is higher. That makes this incorrect. And group 2 most likely have the trait for resistance because their mortality is higher. That's incorrect as well. So those are off the table. The correct answer is 2. This checks out over here. +1 if you got it right. Now we're on to another example of a different organism, the adult European corn borer. And so one mechanism that gives them resistance is a protein that transports substances across the cell membrane. And this protein is in the diamondback moth, which we just read about, and this European corn borer. And it also can develop resistance. So question 22 is asking you to describe information that could be used to support the claim that European corn borer and diamondback moth both share a common ancestor. And so when you read this paragraph, they both produce this similar protein, and that is going to be the evidence you should be using to support the claim that they have a common ancestor. Okay, when we look at the choices that are listed on the scoring guide for 22, the fact that diamondback moths and European corn borers both develop resistance by producing the same protein indicates they may have similar DNA due to having a common ancestor. Or a simpler answer, similar DNA sequences can produce similar amino acid sequences that result in resistance, meaning they both produce the same protein, which means they both likely have the similar DNA, and that could be a result of them having a common ancestor. And so that would be good information to support that claim. So you want to say something about them both producing the same protein, indicating they have similar DNA, which means they're more likely to have a common ancestor. But this is a question that uses the action word describe. So you need to say a little bit. You need to give some detail here. So we really want to connect DNA to the protein, and then that similar DNA result is a result of having a common ancestor. Okay, and that's the end of this cluster, cluster number 5. If you got that correct, give yourself a +1 for this question number 22.